5 Republican senators who stood with Trump through impeachment, through January 6th, through every controversy for the past 4 years, just voted against him on war powers. Not because they changed parties, not because they hate America, not because of some grand conspiracy. Senator Josh Hawley said it himself during a phone call with the president. "This really ties my hands. I am Barbara Green, and this is the only official channel bringing you evidence-driven investigative reporting that follows the facts wherever they lead. Hit that subscribe button right now, click the notification bell. What I am about to show you is happening in real time in Washington, D.C., and the implications are staggering. Before we go any further, I need you to do something. Leave a comment below telling me this. Have you ever seen sitting Republican senators openly defy a Republican president this dramatically on matters of war and peace? Share this video with everyone who needs to understand the constitutional crisis that is unfolding right now in the United States Senate. This is not politics as usual. This is something fundamentally different. Here is the core argument tonight in plain language. The Republican Party is fracturing in real time over presidential war powers, and the constitutional crisis everybody has been warning about is not coming. It is here, it is happening right now. This is not about Democrats versus Republicans. This is not about foreign policy preferences. This is about the fundamental checks and balances written into the Constitution that prevent any single person, regardless of party, from unilaterally starting wars that could drag America into decades of conflict. Tonight, I am going to walk you through the phone calls Trump made personally to flip senators who had voted against him. I am going to show you the constitutional authority that is being challenged in ways we have never seen before. And I am going to explain why removal talk is now happening behind closed doors in meetings on Capitol Hill between senators who have never spoken those words out loud before. Because what happened in the Senate this week is not normal. And what comes next should concern every American who believes in constitutional government. Under the United States Constitution, only Congress can declare war. That is not opinion, that is not interpretation, that is Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, written by the founders themselves. Since World War II, Congress has not formally declared war on any nation, but the War Powers Act of 1973 created a specific process for the legislative branch to rein in any president who wants to use military force without congressional approval. Translation: even Republican senators are supposed to check Republican presidents when it comes to starting wars. That is how constitutional government works. Senator Rand Paul put this in plain language that everyone can understand. He said bombing another nation's capital and removing their leader is an act of war, plain and simple. This is not the first time senators have challenged presidential war powers. During the Vietnam War, during conflicts in the Middle East, during operations in Africa, senators from both parties have used the War Powers Act to force presidents to seek congressional approval. But this is the first time 5 Republican senators broke ranks to challenge a Republican president while their own party controls both the White House and the Senate. The War Powers Resolution that triggered this entire constitutional crisis was designed to prevent further military action in Venezuela without congressional approval. Trump's operation to capture Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro had already happened. American forces had already been deployed. The mission was already complete. Now senators were trying to prevent the next escalation before it could happen. Think about that for a moment. Republican senators looked at what Trump had already done in Venezuela and said out loud, "We need to stop this before it gets worse. We need to prevent the next military action before American forces get committed to a ground war that could last for years." On January 8th, the United States Senate voted 52 to 47 to advance the War Powers Resolution, sponsored by Democratic Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia and Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. 5 Republicans joined every single Democrat to move this bipartisan measure forward. Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Rand Paul of Kentucky, Susan Collins of Maine, Todd Young of Indiana, and Josh Hawley of Missouri. That vote represents a bipartisan constitutional intervention. Democrats and Republicans came together to exercise congressional authority over presidential war powers exactly as the Constitution requires. Translation: when senators from the president's own party vote to restrict his ability to use military force, they are saying out loud that they do not trust him with command of the armed forces. Let that sink in. These are not Democrats playing partisan politics. These are Republicans saying their own president has gone too far and needs constitutional limitations placed on his authority to deploy American troops in foreign conflicts. That is an extraordinary statement of no confidence in presidential judgment on matters of war and peace. Within hours of that January 8th vote, Donald Trump exploded on his Truth Social platform. He wrote, and I am quoting directly, "Republicans should be ashamed of the senators that just voted with Democrats in attempting to take away our powers to fight and defend the United States of America." Notice the language he chose. Our powers, not constitutional powers, not congressional powers, not powers granted by the Constitution to the executive branch. Our powers. Trump sees war powers as belonging to him personally, as his personal property that senators are trying to steal from him. Then the phone calls started. Multiple sources on Capitol Hill confirm that Trump personally called every senator who voted against him on January 8th. This is not normal presidential lobbying. This is not working through party leadership or White House legislative affairs. Josh Hawley admitted publicly that Trump called him directly and told him during that phone call that the war powers legislation really ties my hands. Think about that for a moment. A sitting president is personally lobbying individual senators to give him unrestricted authority to start military conflicts anywhere in the world without congressional oversight. But the pressure campaign did not stop with phone calls from Trump. Secretary of State Marco Rubio started making promises behind closed doors. Both Josh Hawley and Todd Young received what they called assurances from Rubio that there would be no American ground troops deployed in any future Venezuela operations. Translation: the Trump administration was making specific policy deals in private conversations to change votes in public. That is exactly how Washington pressure campaigns work when constitutional principles are being traded away for political convenience. By January 15th, the pressure campaign had worked exactly as designed. Josh Hawley and Todd Young both flipped their votes from supporting the War Powers Resolution to opposing it. The measure that had advanced 52 to 47 just 1 week earlier suddenly died in a procedural vote. Vice President J.D. Vance provided a tie-breaking vote to use parliamentary procedures that effectively killed the resolution, without even allowing a final up or down vote on the Senate floor. Translation: Trump successfully pressured members of his own party to reverse their positions on constitutional war powers and give him blank check authority to escalate military action anywhere he chooses without congressional approval. The constitutional check that had worked on January 8th failed completely by January 15th because of personal phone calls and backroom deals. This is not the first time Donald Trump has personally lobbied members of Congress to change their votes on legislation he cared about. During his first presidency, he made calls about healthcare votes, about tax legislation, about Supreme Court confirmations, but this is the first time he has succeeded in getting Republican senators to reverse course on fundamental questions of war powers and constitutional authority. And according to multiple sources who work on Capitol Hill, that success has emboldened him to believe he can pressure Congress into giving him anything he wants. Several Republican senators are now telling their staff privately that they created a constitutional monster. They gave Trump the message that congressional oversight of war powers can be eliminated through personal pressure campaigns and cabinet promises. They showed him that even bipartisan constitutional interventions can be reversed if he makes the right phone calls to the right senators. And it gets worse. Because what happens when a president discovers that he can flip congressional votes through personal lobbying and backroom deals? What happens when constitutional checks and balances become optional based on who picks up the phone? I am going to show you exactly where this leads, and it should terrify everyone who believes in constitutional government, regardless of their political party. Let me tell you about Josh Hawley, Republican senator from Missouri. Trump loyalist who stood with the president through January 6th, through impeachment proceedings, through every controversy and scandal for the past 4 years. When Donald Trump called Hawley personally about the War Powers vote, Hawley later admitted to Missouri media, "The president told me this really ties my hands when it comes to protecting America." Hawley made a choice in that phone call. He chose party loyalty over constitutional principle. Think about the kind of pressure it takes to make a senator abandon his oath to defend the Constitution, because a president asks him to. Lisa Murkowski of Alaska voted to advance the War Powers resolution on January 8th and never wavered when Trump's pressure campaign started. She told Anchorage reporters, "We cannot have one person making decisions about war and peace for the entire nation. That is not how constitutional government works." For taking that constitutional stand, Murkowski is now facing primary challenges funded directly by Trump political action committees. That is the price of constitutional principle in today's Republican Party. Choose the Constitution over Trump and face political destruction. Rand Paul has spent his entire Senate career fighting executive overreach regardless of which party controls the White House. He voted to advance the War Powers resolution and held firm when Trump's pressure campaign targeted him personally. Paul said publicly after Trump's phone calls, "No provision in the Constitution provides unlimited war power to any presidency. The founders specifically gave Congress authority over declarations of war." Now his own Republican Party leadership is freezing him out of key committee assignments because he refused to give Trump unlimited war powers. Susan Collins of Maine has survived Trump pressure campaigns before during Supreme Court confirmations and impeachment votes. She voted for the War Powers resolution and told Maine Public Broadcasting, "This is about constitutional authority, not partisan politics." When presidents of either party try to bypass Congress on war powers, senators have a duty to intervene, but Collins is 71 years old and may not seek re-election. Translation: she can afford to vote her constitutional conscience because she does not have to worry about Trump's political revenge destroying her career. Todd Young of Indiana initially voted to advance the War Powers resolution, then flipped his vote after Secretary of State Marco Rubio made personal assurances about ground troops. When pressed by Indianapolis media about his vote change, Young said, "I received specific guarantees about military deployment that satisfied my immediate concerns about American soldiers." But when reporters asked about his constitutional concerns, Young refused to answer. Several of his Indiana constituents have since asked publicly, "What about your oath to defend the Constitution?" And these 5 senators are not alone in feeling unprecedented pressure from the Trump White House. Hill staffers are telling me privately that the phone calls from Trump created pressure, unlike anything they have experienced in decades of working on Capitol Hill. One senior Republican aide told me, "I have never seen members this conflicted about a vote in my 20 years working the Senate. They know what is right constitutionally, but they also know what happens to Republicans who cross Donald Trump politically." Let that sink in. Constitutional duty has become a career risk for Republican senators who want to survive in Trump's political party. Here is what just happened in plain language. The constitutional system worked exactly as the founders designed it on January 8th. Both political parties came together to check presidential war powers through the legislative process. Then Donald Trump made personal phone calls to individual senators, his cabinet members made private deals to change votes, and the constitutional check collapsed completely. That is not normal presidential lobbying. That is not how constitutional government is supposed to work in the United States of America. Let me show you the domino chain that should terrify every American. First domino. Trump pressures Republican senators personally through direct phone calls. Second domino. Cabinet members like Marco Rubio make specific policy promises to change votes. Third domino. Constitutional oversight dies in procedural votes controlled by the vice president. Translation: Donald Trump has discovered that he can eliminate congressional checks on his authority through personal pressure campaigns and backroom deals. Think about where that formula leads when applied to other constitutional limitations on presidential power. Multiple sources on Capitol Hill confirm that private discussions about Trump's fitness for office are now happening among Republican senators who have never spoken those words before. One senior Republican senator told me off the record, "When a president successfully eliminates constitutional checks through personal lobbying, we have crossed into territory that the founders specifically tried to prevent." Another Republican senator said, "This cannot become normal. If presidents can pressure Congress to abandon constitutional oversight, we no longer have a constitutional republic." Richard Nixon tried to pressure Congress during the Watergate investigation to stop pursuing impeachment. It did not work because Republicans eventually chose constitutional principle over party loyalty. This time, the pressure campaign worked perfectly. Trump successfully convinced his own party to abandon constitutional oversight of war powers. That should terrify everyone, regardless of political affiliation. When constitutional checks and balances become optional based on presidential phone calls, democratic government stops functioning. What happens the next time Donald Trump wants to use military force anywhere in the world? He now knows the exact formula that works. Make personal phone calls to wavering senators, have cabinet members make private policy promises, use procedural votes to kill congressional oversight. That represents unlimited war power concentrated in presidential hands without constitutional checks. Constitutional scholars from both conservative and liberal institutions are calling this a watershed moment in the collapse of legislative authority over executive war powers. Here is the accountability question I want you to answer in the comments right now. When a president successfully pressures members of his own party to eliminate constitutional checks on war powers through personal phone calls and backroom deals, what should happen next? Should Republican senators who flip their votes under pressure face consequences from their constituents? Should Donald Trump face removal proceedings for undermining constitutional government? Because this story is being written in real time, and your voice matters in determining what happens next. This is not about Democrat versus Republican politics. This is not about foreign policy preferences or party loyalty. This is about whether constitutional checks and balances can survive when a president discovers he can eliminate them through personal pressure campaigns. That affects every American regardless of political party affiliation. Democratic government requires constitutional limits on presidential power, and those limits only work when Congress enforces them. I need you to do 3 things right now. Subscribe to this channel for continued coverage of this constitutional crisis. Share this video with everyone in your network who cares about constitutional government and democratic institutions. Contact your senators immediately to ask where they stand on presidential war powers and whether they believe Congress should maintain oversight of military action. Because silence right now is complicity in the breakdown of constitutional government. I will be here documenting every phone call, every pressure campaign, every constitutional violation as this crisis continues to unfold. Because this story is not about partisan politics. It is about whether we still have a constitutional republic where Congress checks presidential power. The senators who changed their votes under Trump's pressure know exactly what they did. The question now is, what are we going to do about it? Leave me a comment with your answer to the accountability question. Hit that notification bell so you do not miss what happens next in this ongoing constitutional crisis. Because it is not over, it is just beginning. And every American needs to understand what is at stake for the future of democratic government.